Welcome to the Cyber Tech Podcast, inside the minds of everyday IT and cyber pros. Your host, Mike Fierros, will dive deep into the world of IT and cybersecurity, bringing you the stories and insights of professionals who are making waves in the field. From how they got started, to their most exciting projects, and their advice for aspiring tech enthusiasts, we cover it all. So, whether you're an industry veteran or just getting started, join us as we explore the fascinating minds behind the technology that shapes our world. Let's get started.
How's it going? Once again, Cyber Podcast, inside the minds of everyday IT and cyber pros. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for the encouragement online on LinkedIn. I really appreciate that, guys. And shout out to the gentleman that gave me a fist bump at CactusCon in Mason, Arizona. I never got a chance to kind of talk to him and whatnot, but shout out to him wherever he is. And giving me some encouragement too and some thoughts on the podcast. And if you guys haven't listened to this podcast before, make sure you guys follow, like, subscribe, wherever you listen to this podcast. This podcast episode number 14. And the gentleman I have here today, this gentleman, I've been listening to him maybe over a year now. You guys are not familiar to CyberWire, N2K Networks. This gentleman hosts a podcast called Threat Vector from the Palo Alto Networks. If you guys not familiar with him, this gentleman has a wealth of knowledge, especially when it comes to storytelling and cybersecurity. The gentleman I have right here, his name is David Moulton. He's a director of content and thought leadership and host of the Threat Vector podcast at Palo Alto Networks. How's it going, David?
It's going good, Mike. Really appreciate you having me on today.
No, I appreciate it. And I wanted to get you on here because you have a different perspective when it comes to cybersecurity in a kind of a storytelling lens. Especially you host the Threat Vector podcast, which I definitely recommend to anybody that's listened to my podcast. Definitely listen to Threat Vector. Even if you don't understand the verbiage or the jargon, the people that David interviews, I definitely recommend that so that you get to know the jargon for those who want to get into cybersecurity. But yeah, no, I appreciate your time, David. Appreciate you get on this podcast.
Absolutely. And if you're thinking about coming in and listening to Threat Vector, you can pick it up on CyberWire. You can pick it up on the Palo Alto Networks website or in your favorite podcast app that's out there. It's always a litany of them. So I'll just say whatever you're looking for, we should be there.
For those that may not know who you are, kind of introduce yourself, what Palo Alto Networks is, and also the podcast you host.
We'll start with Palo Alto Networks. It's a cybersecurity company, provides solutions, platforms, and services. There's quite a bit there. I think we could spend the entire time talking about Palo and what we do. I joined as part of the Unit 42 team, and that's the services side. Those are the folks that drop in when you're having a bad day, and they get you out of the pickle that you're in. They're also there to help you figure out how to not have a bad day, right? So proactive and reactive services. It's also the home for all of our threat research. And when I joined Palo Alto, and it's going on 3 years now soon, what I realized was that team in particular has a lot of really interesting stories. And we needed a place where we could go talk about some of those stories. So we started Threat Vector as this Unit 42 space. It took off. Some of the other folks in the business said, well, that's interesting. We have an interesting story as well. Can we share it there? And so we're like, yeah, it's Palo's podcast. It's Unit 42. We're friendly. And it grew. And now we're looking at the different domains that we cover and the industry at large and going, what are the most interesting stories? How can we educate? How can we engage? How can we entertain and bring those cybersecurity stories to market? And we do that through the podcast. And like you said, Mike, my background is a little different. I got into security, I want to say by accident. I know that's not the most original. I was working at a company called Salesforce, and I was in pre-sales and ended up having a buddy call me and say, hey, you should come down to Texas and join this little operation at IBM. And I said, yeah, okay, sure. So I went down, interviewed, and ended up joining IBM as part of the design team. That's where my career started. I spent about 20 years designing applications, websites, mobile, and enterprise. Get to IBM, and they said, you're going over to the IBM security team to design software. And I said, all right, first day on the job, they told me, you need to figure out how to build a CISO risk dashboard. And I went, what is a CISO? I know some folks like CISO, but that's how I was introduced to the term. So I started to dig into this space and realized that there are lots of things that are going on that make building a risk dashboard or any solution in security, incredibly complex. Things are always changing. There's a lot of competition. It's got to ride with your business needs and your IT environment. And spent about a year doing that. Ended up in our strategy team at IBM, ended up in the marketing team telling stories, just had a knack for it. I think it comes from a background in design where a lot
Mm,
of times people are going, "Oh, you're the designer. Make it look pretty." And it's like, well, yeah, that's part of it. But design is a little different. It's asking what's the right question to solve, not necessarily making it always look pretty. So when you're in that kind of role for a couple of decades, you realize, how do I sell the story of what I'm delivering? And security suffers from or has some of the same problems where it isn't always a good story. It's a lot of facts, it's a lot of things that have happened. But it's hard to spend a lot of time storytelling. And so I don't know, it was like an opportune moment to put those two skills together, an
mm,
understanding of storytelling and, the peek into security that I had. And then when I joined Palo, it just exploded as an opportunity to lean in and to build a podcast around storytelling. So when we have guests on inside of Palo, so the experts from Unit 42 or across the business, or I say friends from the industry, and that can be analysts or folks that are coming in that just have a really interesting security story to tell. We look at it and go, okay, how do we build an arc? How do we tell a story? And right now we're doing that through interviews and looking at particular topics and trying to expand how people think about a particular area. So if you're in security, it should be great for you. If you're interested, it's a learning opportunity. And then occasionally we just have cool things that happen, stories and or simple things like dad jokes, security dad jokes. It's actually a really thin area. So maybe this audience has a couple of good dad jokes that are security oriented.
there we go. I think what you guys do at Palo Alto Network, specifically with your Threat Vector podcast, I think that's really much needed. And the way you guys have the production, the questions you ask, particularly depending on the per people you're talking to within Threat Vector, so even outside of Palo Alto Networks, I've started listening to it by accident because of CyberWire. I saw your
Hmm.
snippet on there, and what got me hooked was the Threat Vector jingle, the energy jingle. I don't know how you
Yeah.
describe it, but it has that jingle, and right away it caught my attention, and I
Yeah.
looked
The
for it
the
on
audio
Spotify. Yeah,
Yeah, the audio riff. Yeah, it's a great audio riff.
yeah,
And I'm glad that that was the piece that caught your attention. And just to kind of get into that a little bit, we
for sure.
started out as a segment, a snippet on the Cyberwire Daily. Every couple of weeks, we'd come in with a story, 5 to 6, 7 minutes. Honestly, Mike, that's a really tough thing to do, to tell a security story in just a few minutes. Just since we've started, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. We're 10 minutes in and we're just barely into this podcast. So there was some discipline and some cuts that we had to make, some choices, but it gave us an understanding of like, how do you quickly get in and provide something that your audience is going to appreciate, because Cyberwire Daily needs to move on. They have to cover everything in that day. And then when we went to a full format, 30-minute or so, a podcast format, it was a luxury to be able to tell the longer story, but we still find ourselves as a segment, usually previewing what's coming up. So, if this was going out on, Tuesday on the Cyberwire, it's kind of like, hey, we're going to be talking to Mike, and then next week we're going to be talking to whoever the next guest is,
Mm.
just to give you that little bit of a sense of what's coming. But I want there to be value in it. It's your life. You've put your headphones in. Let me entertain you. Let me educate you. Let me engage with you for 5 minutes. And if I don't do that, then shame on me as a podcast host.
I think that's a really good recipe. Folks like me that's trying to learn and grow our skill sets. Your podcast definitely helps us. When you're working at IBM and you got into content creation, is that when you got into content creation?
That's right. I ended up moving away from the design team into strategy, and we were constantly partnering up with marketing and with the product and the design teams and trying to bring things together. And that's normally unified through story, but it's also one of the things that requires you to go make slide decks, the international love language of all corporations, or at least most of them. And you need graphics, you need good writing, maybe you need video. So it was producing some of those things within that strategy team to help coordinate, what were we going to sell internally as a story or a direction, and then what were we going to take out to marketing to really expand. Ended up moving over to marketing, spent a little bit of time working for the CMO there. And then, Kate Reed came to me and said, "What do you want to do next?" Leading content was the more interesting space. I think because I don't have that years in security, the depth and the technical knowledge wasn't a space of strength for me. And ended up leading a really fantastic content team there. Ultimately, got a job at IBM as the editor in chief. And so that was telling the stories from the entire portfolio. A little bit of a diving into the deep end for me, and not coming from a traditional marketing background. But I also think that it allows for this idea of beginner's mind, where you don't know what you don't know, so you're in and you're asking questions. You're going, "Mike, why are we doing this way? What is this for?" And for me, when I'd hear, "Well, we've always done that," I was like, "Oh, why?" Right? That design background, that sort of curiosity would kick in, or I'd go, "Does anyone like this?" Yeah. And if we couldn't find somebody that really went, "Yeah, this is the best thing for us," then it was like, "Well, what should we make?" Right? Like marketing is a weird job in that you're telling a story and you're bringing something of a solution, or you're solving a problem as a company, and then marketing's job is to make sure people know about it. But if you're doing that in an annoying way, I think you've lost, right? Like
Mm.
you're aware of me, but you're not impressed by me as a company. So how do we come up with ways that are fascinating and engaging, and people like it? And then what are the things that we can do because we're in that weird position where we could go answer a hard question? We could research something that maybe the team at a company can't do. But in marketing, we actually have time and budget and maybe even a mandate to go answer those tough questions. So that is a really fascinating spot to be in marketing. And the podcast is one of the expressions
Mm.
of that thinking.
That's really cool. With your experience in marketing strategy and cybersecurity awareness, what's your biggest piece of advice for IT professionals looking to transition into cybersecurity or level up their careers?
I will say storytelling, hands down,
Mm.
is a universal skill. I don't care if you're in cybersecurity or if you're in marketing, if you're in accounting, or you're a doctor, right? Like
Mm.
anyone there can look at the basics of storytelling and use it to be successful, to
Mm.
advance their career, just to be better understood as a culture, as a species, however you want to look at it.
Mhm.
Storytelling and the oral tradition has been part of what we do for ages. And when we activate others through storytelling, it's very powerful. Nancy Duarte has this great book that I recommend anyone go out and take a look at. And if you want
Mm.
to, purchase it, you can. I recommend it. It's called Resonate. And Resonate has a playbook for making great stories, and the idea there is to get to a presentation. But I think you can apply it to other forms. You don't always have to go
Mm.
into a slide or a keynote sort of format. But one of the things that she does right at the beginning of the book is give you this visual. Now, picture a
Mm.
speaker, and you've turned it up on its end so that you can see the part that moves when you turn the speaker on. Now, I want you to mentally picture pouring salt all over that speaker.
Mm.
Right now, it's all covered, and you turn the speaker on to a certain tone, and the salt goes from random chaos into a pattern. And then you change the tone, it moves into a different pattern. You change the tone again, and the salt
Mm.
moves again. And her point with this video was that with our voice, we can move others to different places. And I think that that is such a great metaphor for learning how to be a good storyteller, and understanding that with your voice alone, you can move others to a different position, a different point of view. You can bring them along, you can line them up. And without that story, without that sound, there isn't that leadership. There isn't that ability to draw people in. So that would be my first piece. And then the second is just to stay curious. Start working on some of these big problems and you think you've learned everything or you know enough. And there's always something else. There's always
Yeah,
a new thing. There's
true.
always a new person that you're going to meet that goes, "Hey, you're thinking about that in a way that I've never thought about it. Have you thought about it this way?" And you go, "No. Wait, what?" And that is such an unlock to constantly be seeking out the new and novel and learning.
That's so true. I think for those listening to this podcast right in this episode, particularly right now, is just like David mentioned, just be curious about things. And one thing that even about when I was a little kid, and I'm pretty sure you can relate to it, and others that listen to this episode right now is being looking forward to. I remember book fairs in elementary school,
Oh,
particularly
yeah.
books. There's something about it's been well even as adult now, but there's something about going to book fair and looking at visually seeing it, but then having like it might be like CDs or cassettes back then, but like seeing these stories pop up, like different stories of like adventures. There's very few that had to deal with technology, with IT or even cybersecurity back then. And so reading those stories and listening to the stories, even as a little kid, even now as an adult, it still captures our minds. Like it's still kind of it still pulls at us. And I really love that. I think what you guys do at Threat Vector, Palo Alto Networks, when it comes to storytelling, I think you guys hit the nail in the coffin when it comes to pulling your audience in. Like you guys pull me in just with that audio riff that you guys
Yeah.
have. I was just so curious, like, what's this about, Threat Vector? That alone got me interested, and I started listening to your podcast and listening to the guests you brought on, and learning a little bit about you, David. And it kind of brings you into a different world of like, hey, there's this space right here, be curious about it, learn it, learn the folks that's in it, and constantly learning. Just having that thought as a little kid, now as an adult, and still being curious about things like you mentioned, David. I think that's an awesome thing.
Mike, I'll ask, have you ever looked at or done strength finders?
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, the top 5 are gonna be strategic, learner, positivity, communication, and ideation. And, you might be shocked that those are my top 5, or you might be, "Yeah, that tracks." But for me, one of the I say joke, but I kinda really mean it. One
Mm,
of the things I say about running a podcast is that in no other context could I ask a expert, a world-renowned expert, a highly paid, highly trained, highly sought after person to sit down with me and answer my questions for an
mm,
hour. That's a crazy thing to think about. But if I say, "Hey, it's gonna be a part of a podcast, by the way, we're gonna record your answers and broadcast them to the world. We'll put a little bit of good music at the beginning,
yeah.
and we'll put a summary at the beginning, or, an introduction and a summary at the end." Then people are into it. But if I were to just call up, one of the experts in the industry or somebody at Pan and say, "Hey, do you want to spend about an hour with me answering all of my inane questions?" And they'd probably tell me no. But I think that the podcast gives you license to go do that. And then if you respect it and you come up with great questions and ask them in a respectful way and follow along and have a really interesting conversation, you're representing that person who, like you were talking about with the book fair, is going,
Mm,
"Oh, there's an adventure, there's a thing here, there's something I'm curious about. Where is this going to take me?" And if you can pay that off, then the podcast ends up being something that hopefully you look forward to. I know the podcasts that I listen to, I know when they drop. I know my favorite
mhm.
podcast drops on Sunday afternoons, and I wish they would go Sunday mornings. It's a little bit nerdy, but I love this podcast called Mac Power Users. I've learned so
Okay.
much on that podcast. Every single week, they show up with a really, really fantastic content. In addition to learning, Mac Power Users things, I've also tried to model some of the way that we set up Threat Vector on some of the podcasts that I really like, or the hosts that I
Mm,
really like, and what they've done. They're one of them. Roman Mars, love what Roman Mars does with a variety of his different podcasts, and then try to, I don't know, honor that tradition a little bit in telling stories in this space. And to your point, there aren't a lot of IT romance novels or adventure
yeah.
novels or fantasy novels that are like IT as a crossover. So maybe this is the unlock. You heard it here first. Maybe Mike's going to start to build out an entire shelf at the library of like IT adventure stories, and I'll be the first to sign up to read those.
Oh no, I appreciate that. You're too kind, David. No, no, I think for those of you listening, probably still in high school or college, and trying to figure out how do I get into this IT cyber fields. Just like David mentioned, be curious about things. You guys listen to this podcast, but go ahead and listen to the Threat Vector with David on there. There's different stories on there, and you're gonna notice that those stories captivate you, and one that captivates me too, as well as Threat Vector and other podcasts I listen to, they're IT cybersecurity related, is Darknet Diaries.
Hmm.
That one,
Fantastic podcast. Yeah.
yeah, that one, and again the production, just like your guys is on Palo Alto Networks, David. The production that they do is really good, and it holds you to that story. Like it keeps you
Yeah.
in that. They hold you to that, and guys, I encourage you get on there, find some good IT cybersecurity stories, podcasts out there. It's definitely going to help you learn and also entertain you guys at the same time. For those creating cybersecurity or IT related content, whether podcasts, blogs, or videos, what strategies have you seen work best in growing and engaging an audience?
Being a marketer, non-marketer, I'm always asking, who is the audience? Why would they care about this? I go back to the doing the
Mm,
hard things as being, part of our mandate. The other, and I'll give a lot of credit to Nancy Duarte, who I mentioned earlier with the book.
mm,
She has this idea of never ship a presentation you yourself wouldn't want to sit through. That's pretty tough, right? Because I've delivered a couple of real rotten egg presentations, I'm sure. Um, but when you're putting together content, I think it's finding interesting stories and putting the time and craft into it so that it's the kind of thing that somebody goes, I value this. You respected my time. You're delivering something I didn't know. If you can go out to search or a GPT and ask a question and in seconds get the answer, what's a marketing team doing delivering that? I think those are some of the big pieces. Make sure it's interesting and do the hard work. The last piece is just because it's been successful during a period of, 10, 15 years doesn't mean that it's going to be the thing that gets you where you need to go in the next, I'd say, 10 to 15 months. There's a lot of fast changing technology, and the way that people consume and the way that people expect to be able to get an answer or to engage with a company, it's shifting. It doesn't look like it did,
mm.
10 years ago when a particular pattern emerged, and evolve with it. It's okay.
I like that. That's a good reminder, especially for those that may look for some kind of niche in IT or cybersecurity when it comes to media content creation or something that matters, something where they may be interested in both storytelling and IT cybersecurity things. And so I think that's a good gem, even for myself and for those that may be curious and how to kind of lock into that niche area right there. I think that's really, really good.
Mike, if you're putting together
For sure.
your idea of what does a trajectory look like in this space, either look at me and go like, yeah, that makes sense, or look at me and be like, that guy's career makes no sense. But it depends on the lens that you look at it. On some level, the specific can outperform the general, right? Like you could go, I'm the person who is very, very good at this specific thing for this specific audience, and that's going to be the hook. I've always been a little leery of that,
Mm,
going so deep into something, especially in tech, because things change so rapidly, right? And
mhm.
I'm going like, okay, I'm 50 percentile, I'm the 70 percentile, I'm the 80 percentile of the best in the world of something. Is it worth going after that next percentile and getting to the point where you're the number one person at a thing? Maybe, but there's also a risk that you dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and take years to get to that point, and the rest of the world has moved on. And now you're the only game in town, but nobody's playing it. The other way of looking at it is David Epstein's book Range. I was really
Mm.
inspired when I read this book because I was like, oh, I see myself. And it's to say, be pretty good at a thing, like understand your craft and get good at it, but then learn other things as well. And then figure out how to connect the dots between the skill that you had in the first area and the second area and the next domain. And when you put those things together, that gives you that unique perspective that nobody else is bringing. That gives
Mm,
you those unique skills that not a lot of storytellers in the security space doing podcasts that came from design, right? Like, I think I can defend that space as a pretty small club, and you can too, right? If you're listening, you're looking at your
mm,
experience and the things that you have, and you're going, well, wait a minute. I have a big background in whatever it is, accounting, or maybe you have a background that's in construction. Okay, cool, right? Or you're a mechanic. That's a particular area that you have depth and knowledge. And now you're going to move over and you're saying you're going to be in media, or you're going to be in media and security. You can put those three, four, five things together, and that becomes that collection that allows you to see the world differently, to operate differently, to solve problems
mm,
in a way that your peers who've been very pure in one area may not be able to see. And you bring that value to the team, right? So where they have a bias and they're blind, maybe you don't. You didn't come up in the
mm.
same way that they do. And that adds richness to things. And then because you're that good partner, they're going to help you round out those areas that aren't quite your area of depth. To me, that's a fantastic exchange. And frankly,
Mm.
that's been a big piece of my career where I'll change gears or shift and work in something new. And I'm bringing a lot of that, like, wait, why are we doing this? I've never done it that way. Or, hey, I know how to solve this problem. I've seen it before. And folks, are going, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard of design thinking, or I've never done it that way. I'm like, cool. Let me teach you a thing and we'll solve that problem. And I don't know. I think security is a place that needs that diversity and needs to, include as many people and perspectives as possible. Because we look at what we're doing and we're defending networks, we're defending
Mm,
environments and enterprises, or your local school, whatever it is. And that environment is a reflection on the humans that built that IT
mm.
and the choices they made, and the reflection on the technology that the people who built the technology have. So it's like a combination of those things, and it's being attacked by or prodded by attackers who come with a completely different point of view than how we think we're defending it. And you go, okay, clash all those things together. Don't you want people who are going like, hey, what's this thing over here that's making my brain itchy, to be involved in thinking through how would you protect said thing from a different type of group? And if we're all doing it the exact same way, I think that just leaves us open, especially in security, to very bad things happening.
That's a really good gem right there for sure, David. I think you're right. The human element, and I like how you mentioned about technology's reflection of the people.
Yeah.
And I really like that. I think we tend to forget as we're going through our, for those that listen that are in IT space or that cyberspace, we tend to forget sometimes the human element of things, and especially specifically with technology and whatnot. And we have to be vigilant, ask questions like just like David mentioned, to have different perspectives. I think having different perspectives, whether getting into the IT cyber fields or even those working in it already, man, that makes the team a lot better, a lot sharper. It makes them think about things that we not necessarily thought of before. I really like that.
I had a conversation with Madeline Sedgwick here at Palo Alto
Mm,
about her journey and the things that she's doing. And she started out her career, well, her education at an arts forward high school. She saw the movie Top Gun, decided she wanted to go
nice.
into the Navy. She wanted to go into cyber. I think, folks in and around her family and friends were kind of like scratching their head going, what is this? But Madeline's study of art allowed her to really think about how people operate, what they want to do, and now as a threat hunter, and or at least at the
Mm,
time when we were talking about, the way that she looked at things, it wasn't necessarily how is my network constructed, but what is my adversary's target within my network? And
mm,
if I notice a problem at a perimeter, instead of trying to chase them, she's like, I'll just shortcut to where I think they're going to go based on the TTPs and what I
mm,
understand. And I thought that was such an interesting switch up where she would go, skate to where the puck is, so to speak. And then years ago, I had a conversation with Artie Barker when she was at IBM, and I think she's now at Microsoft. And she was talking about AI and bias. And if everyone puts in their content and it's the same, then the AI just basically has these blank spots, and that we
mm,
need to bring in different points of view. And we did an experiment at the time, and I don't know if it's still true, but if you searched for grandma in Google, it always showed these pictures of old white ladies, as if people who were black or Asian didn't have grandmas. And it was wild to look at this miss from Google that has all this information but had been trained on too small of a cut. I think that on a security team, you run into the same thing as everyone's come up through some of the same training, some of the same expectations, some of how to build a network and how to defend it. And everyone is very samey. Then you have those blank spots where you're going, we've got everything covered. And it's like, no, you don't. You're missing the entire world because all you focused on was one training set, or you looked at it through the lens of like, how does the network work and not how do humans work. And so those two women really opened up my mind to the need for some of the inclusion and some of the different types of training that's required for us to be successful in this space. And tech is just a reflection of humanity, and we shouldn't forget that. It comes with
I
all of
like
our power and all of our biases, all of our weaknesses.
that's true. I think that should be placed on a t-shirt, David. What you mentioned
Yeah.
right there. I think that's a really good quote to realize that in order to work as a team, whether in the cyber fields or in the IT spaces, as a collection as a whole, getting to know one another, getting to know why stuff happens, why stuff breaks, and what are we defending, and who are the adversaries attacking us, is thinking outside that box, if you will, is going to help us better ourselves, not just as professionally as IT or cybersecurity professionals, but also even personal too. It's going to help
Mhm.
us grow and whatnot. I think that's a really good, man. This episode's dropping nuggets like crazy right now in this episode. This is really, really good. Even for myself too. If you could create a completely unnecessary but hilarious new feature for a cybersecurity tool, what would it be?
All right. So years ago, I was a huge fan of a show called Family Guy. You may have heard of it.
Oh
And
yeah.
there was an episode where Peter got theme music to follow him around. And
Nice.
I think that the unnecessary security piece would be like as you're working to log in, theme music is playing, and the answer to the question has to be, "What theme music is this?" And I think it would drive everyone insane. But all of a sudden, you'd be like, hearing the music from Jurassic Park, or maybe you'd be hearing
There
the
we
the jingle
go.
from like a gum commercial, and you couldn't log in until you could be like, "Oh, it's Double Mint. It's Double Mint gum. That's the login. That's my unusable." Unnecessary security feature that I'd put together. Immediately voted out. No business wants this.
No, I think you know what it. I had a when I used to work years ago when I used to work in law enforcement. I had a sergeant come up to me, and it's just another good reminder for me and for other people too that if you can't enjoy and laugh with others that you work with, find another profession. And I think that right there. I mean, it'd be really annoying, but I think at the same time, as far as having a lighthearted moment or moments, maybe not too many moments, but at least a lighthearted moment. I'll be cracking up. I know I'd be.
Yeah, maybe that, the moment where you're going multi-factor. It's the
Yeah.
it's the sixth multi-factor in there where you're going, I have a device that I own, I have a thing I know, and then I have to be able to answer this ridiculous, culturally slim moment from memory. What am I hearing right
Yeah.
now? And it's the riff for like Seinfeld. You know.
Oh, there we go. Yep. No, David, I really appreciate your time on this podcast. I know you dropped a lot of gems for those that always listen, particularly listen to this podcast, and also for myself too, to kind of think about, how do we go about this business of, being a cybersecurity professional, IT professional, and even those that want to get into that niche of like storytelling with technology and cybersecurity, IT. How does that blend together? And trying to figure out who our audience is. And I know that's going to help myself included, and then also those listening to this podcast that may have not thought about that, about not only just getting into cybersecurity or even IT fields, but maybe finding that niche in there where it's like, if you like that storytelling aspect and you're trying to figure out how to bring that in, this was a perfect interview. How do you do that? How do you get to that point from point A to point B? And I appreciate your time, David.
Well, Mike, thanks for having me on and let me shake some of these ideas out of my head with you. It's been all smiles the entire time for me.
No, I appreciate that. David, if folks want to listen to the Threat Vector maybe listens to maybe reads some of your blogs online, how do they do that?
So look for Threat Vector in search, or go to the Palo Alto Networks website and look for our podcast. You can go to CyberWire, and in the podcast section, you'll find Threat Vector. And then as far as blogs go, you can find me at davidrmoulton.com. And that's where some of my writing and thoughts are on the internet, or, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there as well.
Nice, and I'll make sure I put all those links on this episode's podcast notes. That way, folks can get in there and listen to the Threat Vector and get a hold of you if they need to, David, for any questions they may have. Thank you again, David, on this podcast. And you guys listen to this. Episode number 14 is in the books. David Moulton, Director of Content and Thought Leadership at Palo Alto Networks and host of the one and only Threat Vector podcast. Thanks again, David.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.